All right. All right. Well, now you know we're recording in progress. All right. So it's been a couple of weeks. Thank you guys for praying for me while I was out sick. We're going to pick up where we left off last time. Let's see here. And so we started talking about John Wycliffe, the morning star of the Reformation. And we talked about what did the world look like at the time Wycliffe was around, and we talked about how we had Genghis Khan coming in from the east. We had England as its own country now. France is pretty powerful. The Holy Roman Empire making a comeback with the Byzantine Empire on its last leg, and this little country here being the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire is going to finish out the Byzantine Empire. They're going to wipe them out before this lesson is completely over. One of the things I didn't mention last week, but I kind of intended to. Some of you might have noticed that Scotland's up here as well. And if you're familiar with the movie Braveheart, William Wallace had been killed about, I think, roughly 25 years before Wycliffe was born. So if you're familiar with the movie and William Wallace, 25 years before Wycliffe was born, William Wallace is killed for his part in the first war for Scottish independence. And then Robert the Bruce kind of picks it up and he gains independence from Edward the First, aka Edward Longshanks. And so that's the state of the world as we see it. There's a whole lot of other things going on. I had notes in here about what's going on over in Russia and so on and so forth, but you don't need to know all of it, I guess. Some of it's more impactful on Wycliffe, such as what's going on with Scotland, because that's territory England lost during this time. So you can see that they're going to be kind of possessive over their territory. We also talked about the fact that the bubonic plague is going on while Wycliffe is alive. He lived through the bubonic plague, where about 50% of England's population was killed by the bubonic plague. And this raised a lot of questions for people who were living through it, such as, why did God choose us to survive? Why did God send the plague? Why did these people die? Was it the cause of sin? Was he punishing us for it? Are the seals being opened up in Revelation? Are we dealing with these plagues? All these questions are coming up. Apocalyptic preaching is happening. Wycliffe's also noticing a lot of the clergy are dying at a much faster rate than the regular people, relatively speaking. Today we assume, and I think it's a good assumption, that the clergy were constantly exposing themselves to people who were sick, due to visiting the sick, due to performing last rites, due to performing the funerals, things of that nature, where other people would have been avoiding people who are sick. The priests, the clergy, would have been exposing themselves to them. But Wycliffe saw this as a judgment on the clergy, and it very well could have been. The clergy was, in fact, corrupt at the time, and Wycliffe was beginning to see this. And so he began to write pretty prolifically against the Roman Church. And so we talked about all of his writings over here, and we talked about that he was in Oxford University at the time, and in Oxford University, he was studying philosophy, theology, and politics. Those were his three main focuses, with philosophy being his primary focus. Excuse me. And we mentioned last week that he was dealing with this chain link metaphysics back to God, and he deals with that in the book on universals. And prior to that, he had also done a book on logic and so on and so forth. So he was very much involved in philosophy. And we talked about his view of metaphysics last week, and I'm sure it was kind of confusing, and that's okay. It's a pretty in-depth subject, and it's a lot to cover in just 5 minutes. But we talked about the two primary Christian worldviews at the time: idealism and realism. And Wycliffe was a realist in the sense that he believed that all abstract concepts linked back to God. They start in God's mind, and then they're brought into our mind. The idealists would say some of these abstract concepts were just human constructs. And I was talking to someone after class a couple of weeks ago on this subject, and I made an analogy that seemed to click with them, and so I thought I would just repeat it here. For example, my son is colorblind, and he doesn't see the world the way we see it. And so if we all look up at the sky, we talked about blueness and rectangleness last week. We all look up at the sky, and we all call it blue. But he doesn't see it the same way I see it, or the way that you see it. And when you begin to investigate the blueness of something, you begin to realize there's no real way for any of us to know that we all see it the same way, right? If I saw the sky as green, I would still call it blue, because we all call it. And so no matter how, I was talking to, I think it was Ethan about this, and he was like, my whole life is a lie. So anyway, apparently I blew his mind. But we can't describe color. We can only describe color by comparing it to objects and other colors. But we can't describe what blueness is without describing something that looks blue. And as long as we all agree that what we're looking at is blue, then we have no idea if we're all seeing the same color. And so it's always interesting, because as soon as people find out that Miles is colorblind, they begin to ask him 1,000 questions. What color is this? What color is this? And he gets all of them right. That's because we've taught him that when you see this, that's that color. He has a harder time distinguishing between certain shades because of the color blindness, but overall, he calls the same colors the same thing we call them, and people are surprised, like, how are you colorblind? You saw that correctly. And it's because he's recognized that shade as that color. That's just how that works. And so from the idealist perspective, color is just a human construct, that we've just agreed that something like that is that color. But not according to Wycliffe. Wycliffe and others on the realist side said, no, blueness is a very real thing. It's not just a human construct. It's a very real thing. Blueness exists in the mind of God. And so hopefully that helps kind of bring to why these are controversial views and things of that nature. And so that was foundational for Wycliffe, because as he began to work through the philosophy of things and he saw that the church needed reform, he began to ask the question, well, what exactly is the church? And he began to push for but he began to teach the invisible universal church. And this was what needed reform. And last week we talked about one of my former mentors who taught that the invisible church, the universal invisible church, was invented in the mind of Martin Luther. He called the view heresy, so on and so forth. I can demonstrate to you Wycliffe was teaching it. He was using the term invisible church long before Luther was. But not to rehash this point, but I kind of wanted to take this opportunity for a second here to talk to teachers and to talk to students who aspire to be teachers, because we have a responsibility as teachers to do our homework, to do the work, because the people are sitting in front of us expecting that we've done the work. They're not doing the work, they're sitting there because we've done the work. And they want to hear the information and the work that's being done. And so we have a great responsibility to make sure that we present the truth accurately as often as possible. And that's not to suggest that we're going to be perfect, because we're not. We're going to get things wrong. And so we always ask our students to be gracious with us when we do get things wrong, because we are human. And in fact, I had someone, I made an error last week, so I'm going to correct it this week. Earlier, not last week, 2 weeks ago when we were here, I made an error right towards the end of the lesson. I'll fix that. But also, I had a friend reach out to me this past week who is a member of the previous church we went to, and he asked me a question about the Septuagint and the apostles' relationship to the Septuagint. And so I sent him my teachings in this class, answering that question. And I decided to re-listen to the class just because I was like, I want to remember what I said. Should he ask deeper questions now that he's listened to it? And as I began to listen to it, I realized I made a couple of mistakes. And so I thought I'm going to, at some point, listen to all my lessons, catalog all the mistakes I've made, and then maybe do some sort of correction video or something of that nature at the end of the class, just because it's important for us to get the information right. Now, you're probably curious, what mistakes did he make? Well, one, I had said the Jewish Karaites, while I was talking about the Septuagint, I said they existed in the 9th century BC. That's not true. They didn't exist in the 9th century BC. They existed in the 9th century AD. I got my letters turned around. And in the context of what I was talking about, I think what I really intended to say is what I was trying to point to is in the 2nd century BC, the Karaites were around to make this particular claim. But they got a big boost in the 9th century. So that's one of the reasons why 9th century becomes important for that date. Another error I had made was, let's see, this is why I have to take notes because I forget the errors I made. I had said that the Septuagint and the Dead Sea Scrolls, I don't remember if I was talking about the Septuagint or the Dead Sea Scrolls, but I was talking about one of them. It applies to both. Predated the Masoretic text by roughly 1,200 years. And I said the Masoretic text was done in 1000 AD. Well, that's not true either. It was done in about 900 AD. And because I make this mistake all the time, I call the 10th century 1000 AD. So I had 10th century in my head and I said 1000 AD. It's actually 900 AD. So I was off by 100 years there. But I picked up on it. I'm like, I've made mistakes. Now, that's all. What I tend to call that is when teachers make those kinds of mistakes is those are honest mistakes. Those are ones where I can easily explain why I said that. Someone might send me a message and said, you said this. Did you mean to say this instead? I did. Or I let me go check, and those happens. But there comes a point where you're teaching wrong information consistently for years. We have a responsibility to do the work. If we say that this is the way it is, we need to go and make sure that that is the way it is. And when we reteach it, I go back through my notes and I double check. Was I right when I wrote it? Because if I wasn't, I want to correct it now. And so this is where I say, at what point do honest mistakes become gross negligence? Where you should have known. You had every reason to know. You've had the time to figure it out. You've taught it so often. And it either becomes gross negligence or it becomes malicious intent to hide the truth. And, you have to kind of figure that out as a student when you're sitting under false teaching regularly. When the false teacher has been shown that this is not the case, or he should have known over time because the information is readily available. And this isn't even to suggest that Strauss or someone like this is wrong about the universal invisible church. Maybe he's right. Maybe it is a heresy. Okay, I disagree with that view, but let's say he's correct. When you make these sorts of gross teachings, negligence of information, when you're doing that, if you are right, you are undermining your point so hard that you're going to make it impossible for people to hear you. Because you're just going to say it wrong so frequently. And that will be the point of contention, not the actual point that you're making, but the fact that you're getting obvious truths wrong, obvious facts wrong, and you will hurt your position. This is true for all of us with Christianity as a whole. We can't teach falsities because they're inconvenient, because it will hurt our testimony. It will hurt the cause of Christianity. And so we have to get it right. And so that's my little soapbox there for teachers. It's important. We have this responsibility. We don't want to shipwreck the faith. We don't want to cause people to stumble because we're getting things wrong. And there are inconvenient features of Christianity we have to deal with. We have to wrestle with. And we can't make up history about it. We have to, or truths about it. we have to deal with it. So that was that. Pastor made talked about this last week too in his message, and I thought it was beautiful because it was already in my notes. Be not many teachers, because we will receive the greater judgment. That's what James says, and I think we have to take that seriously. We will receive the greater judgment because of the position that we're in. We're leading people astray or to Christ. That's what's happening. So Wycliffe was preaching hard against the Pope. He was preaching hard against the church's accumulation of wealth. Wycliffe had a serious problem with the church accumulating wealth. He didn't believe pastors should own anything. He didn't believe the churches themselves should own anything. We talked about all kind of the philosophy behind all of that last time we met. He had a problem with icon veneration, indulgences. He preached against transubstantiation. He held to a real presence view of the Lord's table, which is a view that's similar to what Anglican churches hold today. Let's see. Yeah, so he was preaching against all of those things. And then in his various teachings, okay, so this is the mistake I made last week. So last week I told you I made an error on the list that was up here, and I needed to correct the error. The problem was I actually made the error last week, not when I made the list. So last week I thought that the list, or not last week, 2 weeks ago, I thought that the list was wrong, so I updated it. But my update was actually wrong. So, but I didn't, because this is a copy of multiple slides, it was only the last slide that I made the update on. Anyway, I was also wrong when I wrote the list initially. So there were two errors, one that wasn't an error and one that was actually an error, and I got it fixed. I had thought that the last age of the church was the last one he wrote, so I had it down here. But it was the first one that he wrote, and that was because I was working through the first one, and for whatever reason, I put it in my mind that it was his last book, so I made it the last book. But his last book was actually Trialogos. But in all of his writings, he's dealing with things like incarnation, redemption, vices and virtues, Christian philosophy, theology, moving into moral theology, and that's primarily what Trialogos is dealing with. Trialogos is actually a really cool book because at this point in Wycliffe's career, I don't know when he makes the switch exactly, but I know he starts, actually it's probably right here. Right here. Maybe not. I know at some point Wycliffe stops writing in Latin. So he's very familiar with Latin, and Latin is the language of the educated. English is a low base language, but he's a native English speaker. He's in Oxford. And he stops writing in Latin and he starts to write in English because he wants the English speaking people to be able to read what he's writing. And so you can see a lot of these have Latin titles to them. These two also have Latin titles, but I do know at some point he switches, and he switches because he wants to talk to the people. And Trialogos is one of the ones. It's obviously his last book. He's writing in English, and he writes it as a dialogue between three people. Tria word, 3 words. Trialogos, and it's a dialogue between 3 people who hold 3 different positions, and so he works. I have books like this at home, and I absolutely love this style of writing where you have 3 voices who hold different positions and they debate with each other in the book. And he works through the different Christian doctrines in such a way as to help the average person understand the depth and the nuances between the different views. And so Trialogos is one which he's dealing with things like sacraments and in the incarnation, Christian philosophy, moral theology, and the ecclesiastical status quo. Where is the church today? And as far as from a moral perspective. And so he's doing that. And then after he releases this book, this is I say book, but it's 4 volumes. After he releases this, you get the peasants' revolt, where the Lollards and the peasants start burning down churches, and they start burning government buildings down, things of that nature. And Wycliffe begins to have to teach against that, preach against that. And so he condemns the Lollards, he condemns the peasants for doing this. He says, this isn't how we're supposed to reform the church, not with violence, okay, and things of that nature. So he condemns that. And this is where he realizes, I can write all I want. I can write all I want. I can preach the truth. It's getting through the people, but what the people really need is the Bible. There was no access to the Bible in English at the time. So Wycliffe is going to, he sees this is the greatest need. It is a lack of teaching, but the greatest need is the lack of scripture understanding. So he wants to get the Bible into the English language. And he's going to do so through the Latin Vulgate. He's going to translate the Latin Vulgate into English. Okay, so he's not going back to the Greek and Hebrew like we do today. He's going back to the Latin Vulgate because that was the received Bible at the time. So he's going to take the Latin Bible and he's going to turn it into English. At this point, there's been no complete English Bible done. There are parts of the English Bible that have been done. I believe Bede, roughly Venerable Bede, if you look him up, roughly 7 centuries earlier, he translated a portion of the Bible, I think the Gospel of John and maybe something else, into English. But also 7 centuries earlier is a long time for the English language. So it doesn't appear like anybody had any access to what Bede had done or what anybody else had done at this point. But there was no complete English Bible. And there were other languages that had gotten Bibles, but English was not one of them. There was a French translation, if I understand correctly, that was also done from the Latin Vulgate, the same way that Wycliffe's about to do it. But there was a neglect in English, particularly English, for the Bible. And it wasn't just English. The Roman Church was putting in restrictions in different places about translating the Bible into vernacular languages. So Pope Innocent III, writing to the Bishop of Metz in 1199, he had this to say. He said, "Clearly no simple or unlearned person should presume to touch the sublimity of sacred scripture or to preach it to others. That they should be seized for trial and penalties who engage in the translation of sacred volumes, or who hold secret covenantals, or who assume the office of preaching without the authority of their superiors, against whom process shall be commenced without any permission of appeal." So if you were uneducated or you were simple or whatever, you were prohibited from not just translating the Bible, but preaching it. And so this is where I like to go, and I like to see how Roman church apologists handle these objections, because this is are pretty serious accusations. And their defense is a pretty simple one. They're like, we weren't prohibiting the translation of the Bible or the preaching of the Bible. Well, they'll say the translation of the Bible into vernacular languages, except done by the uneducated. The problem is they were also doing it for preaching. And so if you've been a Christian for any length of time and you've ever led anybody to the Lord, and they've been a Christian for all of 5 minutes, and their conversion is sincere, the first thing they want to do is tell people. They want to preach the gospel to other people. Now, according to the Roman Church, you're uneducated, and I don't disagree. You are. You have barely begun to learn the nuances of Christianity. You have not learned the doctrines or how to articulate them. But should that then therefore prohibit or cause us to prohibit these young Christians, these uneducated Christians, from preaching the gospel? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Their zeal, their fire, this is exactly what they are called to do, to go out and preach the gospel. And what do? We baptize them. We join them to the membership of our church, and we disciple. And the discipleship never ends. You're being discipled right now. I'm being discipled. We'll all be being discipled today and throughout the week as we call and we work with each other and so on. Discipleship never ends. But we don't prohibit people from preaching the gospel. When they make error, we bring them in, we wrap our arms around them, and we teach them the truth. We're like, try it this way. Say it this way. That's untrue. Be careful. But this is a work in progress. This isn't, you can't teach and preach until you've gone through years of study. Here's the other problem with the Catholic apologists in this situation, is that if you're going to prohibit the translation of the Bible into vernacular languages by the uneducated, which you're going to determine who's educated and who's not, and you can see that there's a need, a demand for a Bible in that language, and you're prohibiting people from doing the work because there's a need and a desire for the Bible in that language, then you have a duty to provide that translation. The Roman Church should have, if there was, in this case, Bishop of Mentz, this is French, if there was a demand for a French Bible and you don't want an uneducated person doing it, then provide the translation, do the work. By refusing to do the work and prohibiting other people from doing the work, you are prohibiting the Bible of the translation of the Bible. So I have a serious issue with this. Even from the Roman Church position, I don't think it's tenable. I don't think they can defend the position here. They were effectively banning the translation of the Bible. 1229, Council of Toulouse, Canon 14. We prohibit also that the laity should be permitted to have the books of the Old and New Testament unless anyone from the motives of devotion should wish to have the Psalter or the breviary for divine offices for the hours of the Blessed Virgin, but we most strictly forbid their having any translation of these books. So you can have it in Latin, which you can't read. And you can have some books. You can have the Psalter, but not the whole Bible. And their position was, and their position's correct in this, their position was if we let uneducated people read the Bible, then we'll create divisions. Yep. Just look around. How many different denominations are there? How many cults are there? Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, things of that nature. Yeah, when people get access to the Bible, there will be division that's created. But what's the alternative? Not to let anybody have the Bible? That didn't work either. That's the entire reason this is happening. Why the reason Wycliffe is doing it. They weren't preventing the Bible to prevent disunity. They were preventing the Bible to prevent their own sins and their own abuse of the laity from being exposed. That's really the truth of the matter. And so, again, serious issues with this. Now, this particular one, this particular Council of Toulouse is against the Albigensians. And I do believe the Albigensians were actually heretics. They were very similar in a lot of ways. There's a lot of overlap here with like Jehovah's Witnesses. They believe that the universe is a battleground between a good spirit and evil matter. So this is like Gnosticism. And then they believed humans are spirits trapped in an evil body. Again, Gnosticism. They believe there were two Christs, one good and one evil, and the good one never came to earth. They have a denial of the resurrection. They have a belief in reincarnation. And again, they hated all physical matter. This is very Gnostic in their view. And Jesus was an angel, just like he wasn't actually God. And so there's that. So the Albigensians, yeah, I think they're actually heretics. What's actually interesting is some of the teaching I received that somehow Baptists were related to Albigensians. That's not the case. And the one reason why is because the Albigensians believed in a credo Baptist viewpoint where you had to state your beliefs before you got baptized. That's the one overlap we have with them. Other than that, everything else is heresy. So I wouldn't identify myself with these people at all. However, this Council of Toulouse, what you see there is a picture. Here's the council. And then here's the Roman Church going and killing the heretics. This is the Albigensian War. And while I do think they were heretics, I don't believe they deserve to die. That's not the Christian way. We don't bear the sword like that. So, but that's what happened. But again, the answer to this was to prevent the Bible. The answer to this is actually to give the Bible and to teach the Bible. That's the answer. It's not to restrict the use of the Bible. The last one here is the Council of Tarragona. No one may possess the books of the Old and New Testament in the Romance language. And if anyone possesses them, he must turn them over to the local bishop within 8 days after promulgation of this decree so that it may be burned. Okay, so now we're going to burn the Bible in people's hands. Now, here's a tough one, though. I don't like putting posts up here or slides up here of information that I can't fact check or I haven't been able to fact check. And so I read this quote in multiple Protestant books. But I have reason to believe, I have suspicions about whether this is a true quote, and I'll tell you why. One, nearly every Protestant source that I pulled this quote from got the date wrong. They put the Council of Tarragona in 1234. Well, the Council of Tarragona, as far as I can tell, did not convene in 1234. It convened in 1242. So I begin to get red flags when people are getting dates wrong, objective dates. So I struggle with that. The second one is when I could find places of the Council of Tarragona actually meeting and people referring to the canons that did exist. I don't know why, but when they would list the canon, as far as I can tell, there's 13 of them. And they would list 1, and then 3, and then 4, and then 5, and then 9, and then 11, and then 12, and then 13. They didn't list them all. And in every single list I could find, Canon 2 was missing. And so I couldn't confirm what Canon 2 said. So the next thing I did is I went to Catholic apologists, Roman Catholic apologists, because this is a charge against Roman Catholicism. How do they respond to it? And this is where I think there might be some legitimacy to this quote. So, because when I began to read their defenses of it, their defense wasn't this canon doesn't exist, because that's what I was kind of expecting to find. I got two primary defenses. One, that this was a local council. It was not ecumenical, meaning this didn't apply to all of the Holy Roman Empire. And two, the second one was that this was a very poor translation of the source text in Latin, that it was a poor translation. Now, I was like, okay, great. Then what is a better translation? None was offered. I could not find a Catholic apologist anywhere who was offering a better translation. They would just say that this was a poor one. I also could not find a Latin text to try to confirm it myself, to do the translation work myself via Google. But I couldn't do anything to confirm how close this might be to something of that nature. So take this one roughly with a grain of salt. It's all over the place. If you want to see most of the Protestant quotes of this, you have to do a Google search for 1234. Because as soon as you type in 1242, the Protestant quotes go away and you get more of the Catholic ones. And so I really struggled with this one. While this one shows up a lot as an attack on Roman Catholicism, I'm less sure about this one than the previous two quotes. So, but needless to say, even the Catholics are acknowledging to some extent that there was a ban locally, okay, on the translating of the Bible. In response to this, Wycliffe writes this: the truth of God stands not in one language more than another. An English Bible may edify the lewd people as it does the clerks in Latin. Why may we not write in English the gospel and other things dedication the gospel? I think I wrote that wrong. Maybe. All right. And other things, dedication the gospel to the edification of men's souls. So his argument here is there's no reason the Bible has to stay in Latin. We can put it in English. God's word doesn't speak better in one language than another. And so Wycliffe gets a team together and he begins to publish the first complete Bible. He translates directly from the Latin Vulgate because that, again, is the received text of the church at this time. And the Lollards begin to copy his work, right? They begin to distribute it as quickly as they can. Remember, there's no printing press yet. So all of this work is being done by hand. And to make matters worse, as quickly as they're making copies, the Roman Church is burning them. And so just think about for a moment how long it takes to write out the whole Bible by hand, legibly, with all these artistic, beautiful drop caps and things of that nature. This is all part of the work, and it's done by hand. Some people have estimated that a Wycliffe Bible in Wycliffe's day would be valued at an investment of about $500,000. And the Roman Church was burning. I hope that gives you a sense of appreciation for the fact that we can buy $6 Bibles today. It blows my mind how far we've come and how accessible we have. I have 50 plus Bibles on my bookshelf, study notes and different translations, multiple English translations. They're just trying to get one English translation of the Latin Vulgate, not even of the Greek and Hebrew, into people's hands, and they're being burned. It's incredible. But Wycliffe's teachings and translation were causing problems for the Roman Church. And so they responded. One of the ways they responded, now Wycliffe's already dead. I didn't give you the date. Wycliffe dies in 1384. So the next slide we're going to go to, we're jumping to 1401. Now the issue is with the Lollards, the people who are following Wycliffe in his teaching. Okay. And so this is Thomas Arundel, and he petitions the King of England and Parliament to create a law regarding the burning of heretics, de heretico corrumbando, okay, the burning of heretics. They, the same persons, and every of them, after such sentence promulgate, shall receive, and them before the people in a high place cause to be burnt, that such punishment may strike fear into the minds of others, that none from henceforth anything preach, hold, teach, or instruct openly or privately, or make determination of the holy, or make any book contrary to the Catholic faith or determination of the Holy Church, nor of such sect and wicked doctrines and opinions shall make any covenantacles, or in any wise hold or exercise schools. So don't teach Wycliffe's teachings, because this is directed at the law. So don't teach Wycliffe's teachings, don't promulgate his books, and don't use his translation, or you'll be burned at the stake. Well, he got his law passed. He got his law passed, and in 1401, the first Lollard was burned at the stake, and his name was William Sawtrey. Powerful testimony if you get the chance to look into him more. But that was the first Lollard to be burned at the stake for possessing William Tyndale's writings, translation, and agreeing with William Tyndale's doctrines. And there was another man that was massively impacted by Wycliffe, and his name was John Huss. He is called the Czech Goose Father, or the Bohemian Goose Father. He's just west of Poland, and they arrest him for espousing the views of Wycliffe. And a local council in 1415, you can look this one up, called the Council of Constance, convenes and condemns Wycliffe of heresy. Wycliffe has already been on trial. We talked about this a couple of weeks ago for heresy multiple times, and England protected him. He has no protections anymore. So they condemn him posthumous, he's already dead, of heresy. They go, they dig up his bones, and they have him burnt. They burn his bones. And then right after that, immediately after that, they grab John Huss and they burn him. Now, Jan Hus says this as he's about to die. He says, okay, so just so you're aware, Jan Hus. Hus is the Czech word for goose. So his name is John Goose, if you were to translate it. So this is what he says. You're going to burn a goose, but in 100 years, you will have a swan, which you can neither roast nor boil. And then right before he dies, he says, Lord Jesus, it is for thee that I patiently endure this cruel death. I pray to thee, have mercy on my enemies. And just over 102 years later, Martin Luther pastes the 95 Theses on the castle church in Wittenberg. And later, when Luther is being tried, he is accused of being a Hussite, and he doesn't even know who they are. So he denies it. He goes, "I'm not a Hussite." And then when he gets released, he goes home. He says, "Get me the works of Jan Hus. I want to see what this guy had to say." He gets the works. He reads them. Not only does he identify himself with Jan Hus at that point, but he says, "I'm the Swan. I'm the Swan 102 years later." It's a beautiful story, but that's a later story. Till then, we have multiple editions of Wycliffe's Day. We talked about, I want to move quickly here because we're running out of time. English is changing quickly during this time. We talked about this before, where we had the great vowel change, we have consonantal changes, and Wycliffe's Bible is already needing an update. And there's a man by the name of William Purvey who does an update. I forgot to bring in my Wycliffe Bibles. I'll bring them in next week for the review, so you can actually look at them. I have a modern update version of the Wycliffe Bible, and I have a facsimile of the Wycliffe Bible done by William Purvey. That becomes the Bible that gets very popularized. And the last thing I want to do before we end this is I want to play for you a video from the Bible Museum that I recorded on my phone, so it's a little muffled. You'll have to pay attention. But this is an actor repeating Wycliffe's portion of Wycliffe's preface to his Bible. And because I find these powerful, I like to share them with you. And I think the actors do a generally good job.
The friars, with their followers, say that it is heresy to write God's law in English and make it known to ignorant men. It seems first that the knowledge of God's law should be taught in the language which is best known, because this knowledge is God's word. When Christ says in the gospel that both heaven and earth shall pass away, but his word shall not, he means that his knowledge shall not pass away. Also, the Holy Spirit gave the apostles knowledge of languages to teach the people God's law. And so, God willed that the people be taught his law in diverse tongues. For this reason, Jerome labored and translated the Bible from diverse tongues into Latin. Christ and his apostles taught the people in the tongue that was best known to them. Why should men not do so now? Preventing such knowledge of the gospel is the same as preventing Englishmen from following Christ and coming to heaven.
All right. So that is, come on, there we go. That is the end of Wycliffe. Next week, we'll pick up with Desiderius Erasmus. We're going to jump right into the Reformation. But now, hopefully, you can kind of see why Wycliffe is called the Morning Star of the Reformation. You guys are dismissed.